Okay, welcome to Animation Samurai's Flash Basic Training. This is Lesson 3. Up to this point we have discussed the main windows that we generally use most when we're working with character animation in Flash. The timeline, the stage, the properties, and we've covered a couple tools so far. We've talked about the selection tool, we talked about the lasso tool, we talked about the free transform tool. We talked about stroke and fill, and we talked about how they interact with each other and how we can manipulate the stroke and the fill via the properties panel. So without further ado, let's discuss some other tools. We have a couple of there's a lot of tools here, and I'm not going to get into every single one. I'm just going to get into the ones that I use the most, and especially in character animation, you're not going to use half of this stuff. You know, like there's a text tool here. This is used, you know, for graphic design, website type stuff. Sometimes I use it in animation if there's like writing or if there's text or letters on, like, you know, clothing or a sign or something. It can be useful. You know, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You know, you can select the stage and you can just type, you know, animationsamurai.com. and use a selection tool. We can select the text, and up here we have all kinds of options. The character, which is the font face, we can, you know, we can set that to whatever we want. I'll select Archer because I'm in love with it. Color, we can make it black. Size, we can scale it way up. The style, these are all the different types of Archer font. We go bold. You know, and then there's, you know, all this formatting, kerning, spacing, line height, all types of stuff. So feel free to experiment with that on your own time. Underneath the type tool, we have the line tool, and this can be very helpful. I use this a lot when I'm drawing perspective, scenes in perspective, or architectural buildings that have perfectly straight lines. That's one of the joys of Flash, I find, is that you don't need a ruler. So if we have the line tool selected, the line tool is essentially one single stroke. And if we look at our properties, we have the stroke color, and you'll notice fill is set to none because there is no fill. And then we have the stroke thickness that we talked about in the last lesson, and then the same stroke options that we had before. So we'll set the stroke to 2, and then we can just if we just click on the stage, you'll notice that we have a starting point, and then we can control where the end point of this line is, right? And if I hit Shift, it's going to lock the line into either a straight line or a 45-degree angle, which is very useful, or completely 90-degree up and down. And I generally will use the Shift key almost all the time with the line tool, unless I'm you know, getting, like, you know, perspective angles like that. You know, so you know, practically speaking, you know, I might, you know, hold Shift, create like a ground plane, and then, you know, say, okay, well, I want this to be my vanishing point here, and we're going to have radiating lines coming from this point, you know, up here, here, you know, we'll have, you know, we'll have a road, you know, going off into the distance like so, you know, and it just very, you know, loosely lay out, you know, a 1-point perspective. You can go 2-point perspective, whatever. I use the line tool a lot for that. Or, as I said before, you can create, you know, it's kind of like working the long way, but you can create, you know, rectangles and squares like that too. And then, you know, if our vanishing point is down here, we can just start connecting the lines like so. And then using the selection key, as long as the lines are all intersecting, we can select what we don't need, and you know, we have a cube using the line tool. So that's how I like to use the line tool. Moving right along, underneath the line tool, we have it's set to ellipse or the oval tool, but you'll notice on some of these tools there's a small black point at the bottom. That lets us know that there's a drop-down menu within this tool and there's other options. So if we click that, we have this sub-menu that shows us a selection of different tools within the shape tool. So we have rectangle tool, oval tool, rectangle primitive tool, oval primitive tool, and the polystar tool. So the two that I use most are the rectangle and the oval. So if we select rectangle and we look at our properties menu, we see that the stroke and the fill are both set to black. We can change those from the property panel, or we can change those in the toolbar panel over here, and we can select a black stroke, and we can select a fill that's like a light blue, and then when we drag on our stage we have this rectangle shape right here, and it's the same exact way as the line tool, where if I hit shift it's going to lock it into a perfect square, which is really nice if I need a perfect square. Or if I need a rectangle, I let go of shift and I'm free to scale it as wide or as high as I like. And then once I let go, we have our black stroke and we have our blue fill. And if we go to our selection tool and we select our black stroke and our blue fill, we have our shape properties the same way we had for our circle. Right? One interesting point to note is that before we create our rectangle, if we go back to our rectangle tool, you'll notice that when we select the rectangle tool and we look at our properties, we have a couple other options that we didn't have before once the square was made. And these are our rectangle options. And you'll see these like little curved corners. And what do you think that does? That controls whether or not the points of our rectangle are going to be curved or not. So if we give it a curve of, like, say, a value of 8, and you'll notice that once we click off here it changes all the values to 8 because the little lock is set and it's going to change it to all of our values. If we have that set to 8 and then we create a rectangle, you'll notice that the points of the rectangle are curved slightly. The higher the number, if we set this to 30, watch what happens to the points of our rectangle now. They're even more curved. Alright, and we can set this, if we set this to a really high value like 200, now we're getting like a really interesting shape here that looks nothing like a square. But it's really the only way you can make that shape, unless you wanted to like freehand it. So it's kind of a neat way to think about things. And then if we wanted to make, if we have our rectangle tool selected and we wanted to make just one corner curved and the rest not, we just have to unlink things. And what I would do is I would actually set everything to 0 and then unlink everything and then set that to the value that I want. If I want it to be like 25, and then you'll notice that it only affects the top left corner. So now when I make a square, the top left corner is curved and the rest are hard edges. And each one of these boxes relates to its respective corner of the square. And another interesting thing to note is that we can give these, we can give the radius a negative. I'm going to link these again. Negative values. So that's kind of interesting. The curve is actually curved in now. So that's kind of an interesting shape there. I can't think of any times that I've used it, but at least you know what it does. And if we go to our oval tool, the same thing with the oval tool. Before we create the oval, we have these oval options, and we have things like start angle, end angle, and inner radius. So if we play with these, we'll set this to a really high number, and then we'll create our circle. You don't really see a difference, right? You can select, if we select halfway through, that's when you're going to start seeing sort of these different, it's like half of a circle. And you'll notice that, whoops, once we've created the shape, we can't alter that once it's made. So it's kind of like a one-off. When you're creating the shape, you have that option of changing that angle. If we wanted a perfect half circle, we would set that to 180 degrees, and then we have, if we hold Shift, it's going to make a perfect half circle, right? And then we have options to change the end angle, and you'll notice that creates like that could be useful, I suppose, for like a pie chart or something, maybe, or if you wanted to animate Pac-Man. if we wanted to animate it's kind of Pac-Man-ish. I'm going to be completely honest. I've never in my life messed with these options before. But hey, Pac-Man, And then, of course, he chomps. But we're not gonna animate Pac-Man chomping for this tutorial. But there you have it. And then inner radius. Let's find out what that does. Hey, all right. So I don't know. You can get all kinds of interesting options here when you're creating circle and square shapes by manipulating these settings. For now, let's keep it all at 0. So let's call it a day for that one. And in our next lesson, we'll talk about 2 of the most powerful tools in Flash.